Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining on this, I believe, fourth episode of Datadog On. This is a series where we invite engineers from Datadog working on very interesting topics to share their experience, their knowledge about either a process or a tech stack, etc. And today we are going to be talking about incident management. This is a very special episode one that I like a lot, because we are going to be talking about how we've been doing incident management throughout the years, and then based on that knowledge and that experience, how we turn that into a new Datadog product. So probably many of you already know, but just so you know, Datadog is a monitoring and analytics platform that helps companies improve observability of their infrastructure and applications. And my name is Ara Polida. I'm a technical evangelist at Datadog. This is my email and my Twitter handle. So if you want to give us feedback or suggest a topic that you would like to learn about, please reach out. But the important people today are here with me. They are Leo and Matt. Do you want to introduce, for example, Leo, do you want to start introducing yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Leo and currently the manager for our SRE teams and resilience engineering teams. And I've been working on our production environment incidents at Datadog for more than 6 years, so I'd be happy to talk about this today.
Hey everyone, I'm Matt. I've been working at Datadog for about 2 years now, mostly in the alerting infrastructure. Recently started adapting our internal incident management product into the product. And so I'm excited to present a little bit about the product side and a little bit of our engineering on that side.
Fantastic, thanks. So I think to talk about, to understand how we and why we manage incidents the way we do, I think it's important to give a little bit of overview of the scale Datadog is running. So Datadog right now has more than 10,000 customers. We process trillions of data points per day. We do 1,000 deployments per day, and we work in a highly distributed teams. So needless to say that sometimes things don't go as we would expect to. And I wanted to add this quote from our CTO that during Dash this year, our conference, he mentioned that incident is something that you need to acknowledge a little bit. As soon as you run a complex application, you are bound to have issues. So I think this is important to understand when you're running a very complex application, that is something that you should be taking care of. But in case there are people who are watching who are not that familiar with incidents and incident management, can we give them a little bit of quick introduction? Maybe Leo, you can tell us what an incident is in Datadog.
Yes, of course. So let's see what the formal definition of it is. Obviously, it's a definition with one sentence, so it's hard to cover everything in it. But at Datadog, what we say is that any unplanned disruption or degradation of service that is actively affecting customers' ability to use Datadog is an incident. So it's covering a lot of cases and scenarios, but it's not covering all of them. So there's a lot of other ways to categorize incidents, and sometimes understand if it's actually an incident or not. So we came up with a couple of them, which I think are now pretty standard in the industry, like classifying by severity with numbers. So for us, the SEV 1 is the most severe type of incidents, whereas SEV 5 is the most minor incidents we can have. And then also internally, we've come up with that definition, which, to be honest, is mostly historical, but I know some other people might also do it. Outages are like high severity incidents, and incidents in general are, when we talk about them as incidents, they're lower severity. But there's a couple also of other things, I think, around incidents that are interesting to know about, like when we were saying it's actively impacting customers when there is an incident. you might know that Datadog is a customer of Datadog to some extent because we dog food a lot our product. So the own usage of Datadog that we have when it's down or when it has issues, we do classify it as an incident. Because for us, it's very important that we also capture those failures, even if it's not impacting any of our customers. We really classify them as Datadog was an actual customer. And another thing that we've learned over like the years of coming up with more precise definitions is we try to give a lot of examples around what is actually an incident for each of the severities, and it's very hard to play that game because every incident is kind of unique, and we'll I think talk about it next. But if you can plan whatever incident you'll have in the future, you're likely very, very good at what you're doing, and you don't really need an incident response. So in this game, like it's really not really the point of trying to figure out what the proper definition is at that time, but really more focus on the incident. And so that's why I think it's even more important to talk about the incident management process rather than incidents themselves. And I think that's what's coming next.
Yeah, so exactly. So what's, again, for people who may not be familiar with the term, what is incident management exactly?
So I can, maybe quickly go through that, and maybe I'm sure Matt will have a different version because I'm more like in the category of person at Datadog who came up with this definition, and maybe Matt has been more on the other side, like trying to use those management processes to respond to things. But yeah, like basically the incident management is all the kind of processes and workflows we put around dealing with incidents, which is very broad. It can be, from what tools we use, who to call when you have a problem, what's kind of like the data you want to capture during an incident, how should you deal with things before the incident, during the incident, after the incident. And this is trying to, again, like cover as much as we can, but we know that things won't fit, 100% on this. And this is an example of what's in our incident management process. So the timeline, identifying like a few key phases of the incident. So in there, like you can see, for instance, in yellow at the left-hand side, it's pre-incident. So basically whatever happens before we actually open the incident, usually someone sees something wrong, or like a system triggers an alert, or it can be different sources for the incident. And then we have this process trigger. So what we call IR is actually the incident response process at Datadog. And then once the incident is open, we start resolving the incident, and coming to the state of stable means that we mitigated the customer impact. So at that point, the service has been restored. But usually before closing the incident, we make sure that the stable state will be lasting, and we make sure, like sometimes you have to put mitigations in place that are not super long term, and maybe you have to undo them and roll out some code, or it can be a variety of different things. And then the green phase we can see on the right hand side is about following up when the incident is finished. And so postmortem is a process that we go through for a number of our incidents, not all of them. I think we'll go more in details about that next. But this is really an example, and we can derive a bunch of different metrics, which we don't really use to analyze the performance of our incidents, but maybe it's more like as indicators that tell us, like sometimes we can see outliers, and we then like ask the question, why weren't able to detect that incident very early, or why the customer impact in this case was particularly long. And that's actually data that then we funnel into our follow-up process for incidents, and maybe understanding more the factors that led to those outlier metrics. So just as an example, maybe Matt has like a different vision of this process, being a responder and not someone who wrote the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think this timeline is generally in the abstract true. There may be more detail that you could add to these stages. The life cycle typically goes from, the impact has begun, you're not aware of it, and then you have some alerting that occurs before that, and there might be tooling involved there. Datadog obviously serves that purpose as a product. And then, there's a stage when you're in the middle of incident response where you're doing some sort of triage, what is the impact, what's the reach, which customers are affected, which systems are involved. And then, proceeding from there to investigation, which is another point where Datadog gives you visibility into your infrastructure and your service mapping. And you can see, through the different facets of the Datadog product, what's actually going on here and identifying a root cause. And then, yes, as you said, you eventually resolve. Throughout this, you may have some sense of, the customer impact changing as you approach resolution. And so you need some notification or communication capability. And then, like you said, I think after the incident is really one of the overlooked aspects of incident response, which is where, when that context is fresh in your mind, what happened in the incident best right after the incident occurred. And so fixing it twice is really reliably going to happen right after an incident. You're not going to be able to follow up in a month and remember exactly what went down and be able to fix it from there.
Cool. So I guess the next question would be why setting up this format? Because there seems to be a lot of paperwork involved with this process, which obviously, as you said, the main goal is to take the system back to the normal state. Why adding all that overhead on top of actually fixing the issue?
Yeah, it's a very good question. The first answer I think we can give is, going back to what we just said for more than 10 minutes, there's a lot of things happening during an incident. Like you have to assess the customer impact, you have to understand what services are broken, you have to fix them. Sometimes it's not like a single person doing that, it's multiple people. Sometimes the bug, it's actually, or like the issue you're dealing with, you're able to mitigate it, but not really solve it, long term during the incident. So you have to spend time after the incident. So that's already maybe more than 5 things that you have to do, and not really having kind of a consistent way to make sure every task is assigned to someone, and then it's clear what people need to do, and then that work is efficiently moving forward is obviously challenging for an organization that has complex systems, as Alexi was saying, because this is just bound to happen. You can't expect to not have incidents. I think that would be unreasonable. So those disruptions will happen. So you have two choices actually, have a formal process around it or not. And because every disruption is going to be some sort of an improvisation, as I was saying earlier, you've not seen it before, you could either improvise the technical response and how to organize it, or just the technical response. And so that's why we have this process around incidents, so that it's freeing our minds and effort to really focus on the problem and the technical problem and the customer relationship while there's an incident. So in this, we use a couple of different things. We use key roles during the incidents, having an incident commander who decides what's best during the incident, and will make the different decisions that need to be taken, or people to manage the communication part of the incidents, things like that. But there's also a couple of other ways. If we can move to the next slide, there's a couple of there's one in between that was skipped. There's a couple of different things. For instance, consistency is important for incident response, because we're a growing organization, so there's a lot of new hires, and if you start at tackling incidents differently each time, obviously you're probably becoming less efficient. Then there's a second aspect about it, which is that like if it's an incident, then it's probably a stressful situation for your organization, and incident response is also a way to clearly assign expectations from people and also give them ways to escalate problems. And this is something that's very important, as incidents sometimes they go beyond what a single on-call rotation can do, and so having a way to coordinate between people to escalate those problems is really important. And maybe one last thing about it, and I think this is a good transition for what's next, is also like collecting data, like in this incident response process. What you mentioned as paperwork is actually something that is like we're trying to minimize the friction there in like collecting all those incidents into a database. And the reason for it is not really tracking the performance of our teams, like saying, oh, if you have less incidents, then you're probably like building more reliable software, because this is like incidents and disruptions, and so it doesn't really relate particularly to performance, but rather than like this, it's really to focus on the learning aspect and the resilience aspect. So if we capture this data and we know about it, then we can learn from it, we can decide what we do next about it and things like that. This is really for me the most important part, but maybe Matt has also more to bring on this topic.
Yeah, a couple of points here. I mean, I think setting up a formal incident management process is important from the perspective of the responder. The individual who detects an incident, it's a very isolating position to be in. Sometimes it can be that you've been alerted and it's off business hours, and that you're the only person who's seen this alert. So having a formal process can really create structure around how to bring other people into that and not feel so alone in your incident response. And then the second point was that having this kind of radical visibility, if you're collecting data about every incident, I think that really goes a long way towards accomplishing that goal, that it isn't a blaming game. It's it's really more about learning and seeing what's gone wrong. And if you do that for every incident consistently with a formal process, it's much easier to have that sense of equality. And it's not that our system is less reliable in a blaming kind of way, but more that the system could be more reliable because we see the same flaws across the whole system.
Okay, so in order to do all of that, to collect data, in order to improve the learning process for the future, we've been building throughout the year some internal tooling around this.
Yes, and this is very much of like a process that is iterative, because again, like I think this was one of the initial disclaimers, but there's no one size fits all. So depending on the size of your organization, the complexity of your incidents, and just the context you're working on, like I think that the needs you have are different, and like over the course of the past few years at Datadog, that changed greatly. Like just the nature of incidents, and we're seeing way more multi-team incidents now, and so there's likely like a larger collaboration part in the incidents than before, but this grows with different dimensions in your organization. So some things that we started to do were first the collection of the data, so going to like basically a database for every single incident we have and like putting it in there so that people can find it. And the other aspect about it was the collaboration during the incident that was necessary to really put in a single place, because whatever like what Matt was saying earlier, when you're isolated during an incident, you're like the only one, and then what can happen suddenly is you are escalating kind of yourself in back channels things, like with someone or with your manager, or with other peers. And the problem with that is that, like, later on, if it's an incident that's cooking and like suddenly there's a need for way more people being involved in the incident, all the context is kind of lost in Slack DMs or emails or Jira tickets, or you name it. And so what we wanted to do was really have people kind of converge in a single place where they can find the information. Would it be on our messaging systems like Slack, or like on that incident database? So that was really one of the first entry point that we added in this process. When someone wants to generate the incident and create that first response after the incident process has been triggered, there's a one channel that first is only visible to you, but then you can start putting all the information here. And later on, if someone joins, all that information will be publicly available for them.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that, in this theme that sometimes you begin an incident in isolation. A part of our process that we've actually built into our business logic of our product, of our internal tool, is that as you escalate to an outage, there's actually a different channel that this is announced to. And so we have these global announcement channels where any incident that gets created is announced generally as an incident. But as it is escalated, you realize, okay, this is actually a much larger incident than I thought. It's affecting more customers than I initially recognized. And so you escalate to an outage, and then you have individuals who are specifically assigned to this role of incident commander who can come in and join that incident, so that you don't have that isolation if you know that it's a high severity incident. And having this separation, I think, creates different visibility for things where, it relieves some of that pressure of, like, I'm responding to this incident. I don't know exactly what's going on. I don't necessarily want the executive level to see this as it's affecting our business prospects. But it is an incident needs recovering from. And then once that context becomes obvious, you can actually escalate to an outage, and then have the relevant interests get involved, and people actually go and handle that at the appropriate level. So I wanted to call that out as well for our internal tooling.
Yeah, it's almost a way to avoid having too much information and people will start ignoring those things. So it probably some way to organize that, as you said, maybe at a certain level, executive level, they're only interested in the very important outages that are affecting a lot of our customers.
Yes, exactly. But at the same time, it's really working on a thin line, because you also want to make sure that sometimes the assessment of the severity or like the impact might be hard to do, and you might get it wrong. Actually, you might think that all of the customers are impacted, where only a single customer is impacted. That happens for a fact. And the problem with, as you said, like discouraging sometimes people to escalate, is that then it has actually the opposite effect. Like, if people think that they will wake up the CEO, like you're just taking a random example, that's not what happens. But if they would wake up the CEO once they escalate, maybe they would fear pressing that button. What we want to do here is actually kind of the opposite, saying like, if you legitimately think that this is worthy of more eyes, like, please do press the button. It's fine to get it wrong, but if we get it wrong, maybe we need to understand why you weren't able to make that assessment fairly. And so actually, going back to the process of iterating and learning from the incidents, this is actually something we pay a lot of attention to. So when we run the postmortem, for instance, we want to see what customer impact was at the time during the incident, but also like before that, what was the assessment? Was it correct? Could we have had more observability to tell us something more accurate at that point? So really, everything is public there, and it's made so that really like everyone can feel safe to escalate things, even if it becomes more visible. Like we accept also this kind of like rate of, false positive to some extent. Obviously, if you start getting 100% of false positives, you have to, deal with it and fix something. But in a culture where we are, trusting engineers and giving them the power to actually escalate things if they think it is worthy, we've seen that it's actually creating like a more, a positive circle where like, people are actually feeling empowered to make those kind of calls themselves.
Okay, so we've gathered now a lot of information throughout the years in a database. When do we start thinking that, and why do we start thinking that it would be better to integrate all of that within Datadog?
There's a couple of reasons, and starting with one, which is that, basically we use Datadog for a lot of things internally, like mostly when you are in an incident, you're on Datadog, at least, you have a couple of tabs open and you're looking at services and you're looking at alerts and a couple of other things like, logs and traces from that service, etc. And we have systems which we created that enable us to really use those signals that we collect and link them into our incident timelines and scripts and postmortems, etc. But we're not really benefiting from all that context that is still in Datadog. And obviously for me, like at some point, it was obvious that if we had the same kind of like context and database shared with our incident data, then it would just become richer in the content we have on these incident reports. So for me, that's one.
Yeah. From an engineering perspective, I think what we've built with our internal tooling, we collect a lot of data, and obviously because Datadog uses Datadog, we collected a lot of data that's actually metadata about information in Datadog. And so you'll see, incident response typically beginning with a monitor alerting someone, and that monitor linking out to some other part of Datadog to describe what it's actually monitoring in more detail. And then as you go through incident response, you're actually adding metadata to the incident app, the internal tooling that records, okay, I saw this trend on this dashboard, or I saw, these logs. Maybe these are relevant. We should take a closer look. And so you start to see lots and lots of metadata related to Datadog, not living in Datadog, at least for our internal response. And I would assume that our customers who have their own incident response tooling internally have a similar trend if they're using, all of the different tools that we have in Datadog. They would be saving information that they're seeing as they're doing their incident response over. And so just tying those things together with a closer connection, I think makes a huge difference for our customers, because then it's not just one thing having metadata about the Datadog app. It's actually, those relationships are built into the product.
So one of the things that happens in Datadog is that throughout the different products, you can tag as you want any data point and correlate all those data points together, and that this would be another like a use case to have also incidents as part of that potential correlation between all the data.
Yep. And what's even more important in this is we often see a lot more monitoring data added to the incident after like the incident is actually resolved, because then you go through the analysis of going really deep, understanding why. And it's hard to say there's a root cause in distributed system, because most of the time it's actually not accurate that there's a single root cause. There's usually many. So I like to call them contributing factors in that sense, because usually there's more than one. But you can see metrics or APM traces or logs or things like that, and they all added to the incident after we ran through that investigation process. And that's when really it makes sense to have, with the tagging system and the correlation having this kind of like discoverability where you can align things together and really, you know, bring the data together so that you can actually understand what happened during the incident.
I think moving forward into the product side of this, what we've built, maybe we can walk through kind of a typical incident response, and our product can play a role in that. Again, typically you would have some kind of alert that comes to you. This one's obviously okay, but it would be triggered. You come to this page, and one of the things that I think is worth calling out here is that you would, at least at Datadog, the way that we've written our monitors, we typically have a dashboard or maybe some link to the logs for the service that are relevant to this monitor, so that you can see directly, you know, if it's, you know, maybe your first time on the on-call rotation or you're not familiar with the service, you come to this monitor that's triggered, it's alerted you by some, you know, maybe through Slack or PagerDuty, and you can see immediately, okay, here's my lead. I can triage based on the information contained in this dashboard or this set of logs. So going to the next slide, you might see, you know, on the dashboard certain trends, and directly from there, here's a point where you can have a tie-in with our incident product, rather than copying something from this dashboard and adding that metadata to a separate, distinct product. Right here, you can just go straight to a one click away, you know, use this context and add an incident. This is an obvious trend. And so this gives you a little bit of that feeling of, you know, I'm investigating within the product. I know that an incident has happened, but I haven't really escalated it to the level that we have a shared workspace on this incident. And so then you go ahead and do that. At that point, we try to keep this as frictionless as possible. So I think it's worth noting here that you're not always going to have all of the context from, you know, a single signal. Incident response is an iterative process. You may think that the impact is a certain level when you first initially look at the signals, and then later on you have to escalate or, you know, de-escalate. And so we try to keep the declaration as frictionless as possible. I think something that's worth pointing out here is that when you're doing this in a separate, distinct app, like our internal tool, notifying other people can be a really scattered process, as Leo was talking about. You can have, you know, lots of back channeling where maybe someone notices and they enter the incident on their own, but then maybe as the initial, the declare of the incident, I reach out to someone that I know is familiar with this system and bring them in. Datadog has a really rich notification system, and so being able to tie that in here as well adds a lot of value. If you know that a service is related to a different service using Datadog's service mapping, you can then, you know, find your on-call schedule for that second service and bring them in right here, even if, you know, maybe they aren't seeing those signals or maybe their monitors aren't firing. So I think, you know, in the theme of collecting information, obviously declaration is frictionless, but you want to collect as much as you can. And this is where we introduce some of this tagging that we were talking about. Customer impact is kind of a separate piece where you maybe want to track things that are related to customer impact separately from root cause analysis. And so I think, one of the things to call out here is that in the incident app that we've built, the product, these properties that you're tracking, these can be taken from any of the tags that you have reported for your metrics or other, maybe APM services, traces, and this sort of thing. These are configured ahead of time, so it's not too noisy. But you can basically use anything that you've reported. And so these adapt with your usage of Datadog. Another thing that's important is collecting the timeline of an incident. So this, typically would look like, okay, we have a Zoom room or we have a Slack channel and we're responding to the incident. And as we're going, we're building up this context, this history of what's happened for that incident. This may not necessarily end up in the shared workspace unless you have some integration that can do that. And so what we've built for our product is that we have actions you can take to either import the transcript for the Zoom meeting, or you can import specific Slack messages that are relevant to that incident, and then mark them as important here, and decide after the fact, when you're going back to look at re-review that incident, you can see which ones are important for a postmortem, perhaps a public postmortem, or even an internal learning.
Good. So going back to, and I think this has been more or less the big theme of the session, the learning process. This is not only about fixing a particular incident, but help get that learning for the future. So how are we doing postmortems, and how also can we integrate those postmortems in Datadog?
Yeah, so this is a pretty easy to use product. It's very familiar if you've used any kind of document, like Google Docs and this sort of thing. But again, ties back to that kind of platform theme that we have at Datadog, where you can use data from across Datadog in your notebook. The way you get into that is directly from the incident app. You can use this remediation tab, where you can keep up with your tasks that are related to that incident in the moment, but then also when you're looking back, you can create a notebook that will hold your postmortem or other relevant information about that incident. Creating it is pretty easy. You can just create one through the Notebooks UI and then add them here. So you're making that association with your incident from here. And then when you're actually editing a notebook, here's where I might insert a animation. You can have your graphs and any linking to other parts of Datadog here. And this is really meant to be something that could be exported to even a customer-facing postmortem. Sometimes we do public postmortems, and sometimes we do only internal postmortems. But this gives you access to all of your Datadog data that you have in your account right here linked into the notebook.
Going back also to this concept of having all that information about our infrastructure and our applications on the same place, to be able to have access to those at any point.
Yeah, and really what's great about notebooks, and that there was also, I think, something recently, an addition recently that were made to notebooks, is the collaborative aspect of them, because what Matt is saying, about basically sometimes it's an internal, sometimes it's an external postmortem. There's actually way more sharing categories than that. Like sometimes you want to share a postmortem with someone in your team because you're working on it, on the investigation part, and having everything where this is a Datadog graph that you can edit and link back to a dashboard, and then explore other metrics and maybe add them to your current notebook. And that would be more when you're doing the investigation and coming up with the postmortem itself. But then once you've written it, even if it's just an internal postmortem, you want to get it reviewed by a bunch of other teams, or that were involved in the incidents, or maybe that are experts on these systems that they didn't have the chance to really contribute to the incident at that point. So really, it's a tool that allows you to capture that information, but also, as you said, really put it closely to the monitoring data. And it's a chance, at least in my eyes, to make sure that the monitoring data and the monitoring configuration you have always evolves and improves during incidents, because once you come up with that postmortem, you usually will find that missing graph that you didn't have during the incident, and you'll be directly able to add it to your notebook, add it to your definition of your dashboard, and and link everything together.
Yeah, and an example of that collaborative editing might look like someone seeing a signal from a dashboard graph and bringing that into the notebook, but then someone else seeing that graph once it's on the notebook and refining that further, saying, oh, actually there's more series in this graph than we need. This is actually the signal, and refining that graph further.
Cool. So before we finish and we pass to the Q&A, I would like to have a little bit of discussion between you two. So you said the Datadog is a Datadog customer and is considered as a Datadog customer also for incidents. So we do a lot of dog fooding of our own product, of course. So you've been building all this internal tooling, and now we have this product that currently is in beta, but is in public beta. And how you plan to, first of all, start using the product, or continue using the product, and how it's going to be that feedback loop as a customer, Datadog as a customer of Datadog, giving feedback to the product team.
Yeah, so I think one thing to point out here is that a lot of our thoughts on the incident management product were informed by this internal tooling that we already have. And so feature parity is really important in this regard. But one thing that we've actually discovered as we've been building out the incident management product and bringing on customers into the open beta is that we're actually doing pretty industry standard practices. People are either working with this kind of tooling and they're looking for that further level of integration, or it's something where they said, well, that didn't occur to me, but the fact that you're doing that is useful. And so I think it's worth pointing out that Datadog has a very strong incident management process that we've been able to adapt into our product, and it's really hitting a lot of our customers' needs right out of the box. So I think Datadog, we have other design partners, but Datadog as a customer is a strong design partner in that regard.
Yes, and what's been interesting is also when we were building that product to see all the different points of view when dealing with incidents, and I think we covered that in the other sections, but you might not see using the tooling and using that incident response management process, the same if you're a responder or if you're an incident commander or if you're an executive at the company, because you're looking for different things when you're looking at the incident tooling. You may be looking for how you're going to prioritize eliminating a problem that maybe is something that generates a lot of customer disruptions, or like you're just looking to get help when you're actually in the incident itself and wanting to escalate or wanting to get to the right data. So all of this is also very interesting to do while we're doing our response, but opening it up to other customers, other types of organization, and making the tooling basically in a way that everyone can really adapt it to what they need in their organization was a very, very interesting process to do. Even for us, it was a learning opportunity to also see how our customers use Datadog for that, and I really appreciate it. Personally, this launch, I think it was really interesting.
Yeah, I've gotten a really good feel for how the parts that are unique about Datadog's incident response, which parts are unique, because some of the requirements that we have aren't really being asked for in other places. One really good example of that from this presentation is having the multiple announcement channels on Slack and having that escalation policy driven so that you have, certain severities notifying different groups of people. That's something that I think is pretty unique to Datadog and so far in our experience. So we're contributing features out of the Datadog internal partnership that maybe would provide value that people don't expect.
Cool. That's been super interesting. So we are going to go now for questions. So we are going now, as we said, for questions. For those who join midway and don't understand what's going on, what happened here, I explained it before playing the video in a very meta way, because talking about incidents, we also had an incident for this session in which Leo lost internet connectivity just before the session. So we decided that it was a lot richer to just replay the internal dry run that we did a couple of days ago, because we didn't want to lose that conversational aspect of the session between the SRE team, who has been creating this process, the incident management process throughout the years, and the engineering team who is building the incident app at Datadog. So we decided to do that. Now the Q&A is going to be live. Hopefully Leo was able to dial in. So I'm going to start seeing the questions. In theory, we only have 8 minutes left, but we are going to let it go over if needed, just to basically for all the issues that we had today. So thanks a lot for staying in. So the first question that I have here in the Q&A, let me open it, is from Sam Handler. It's, do all teams at Datadog use the same incident management process, and have any teams push back?
Yeah, this might be a better question for Leo, but I'll take a shot at it. At least in my experience, we all use the same incident management process. I do think that there's, adherence is probably a challenge no matter what organization you're a part of, because different teams maybe have slightly different processes, and obviously the shape of their systems is different, and how they communicate with one another is different. But generally speaking, we have a lot of organization-wide discussion about the process that we use and the tooling that we use, to make that process valuable. So at least in my experience, every team that I've been a part of has used the same process. Leo might have more insight across the organization if there's been problems with that.
Yeah, I can try to illustrate that a little bit. Can people hear me okay? I'm sorry for the bad
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, so I can tell you maybe by illustrating the history of incident management at Datadog. So when we started, obviously, not all teams were using that, and we started with a couple of different teams. I wouldn't say we got pushback, but we did get people that were used to do other things. And so obviously, when you're stressed out and when there's an incident and you're already improvising by a lot, you don't want to change those things, and there's a lot of muscle memory. So it took a lot of effort to communicate about the process, train people, document it. But I think what shows the success of this and what makes it something that I'm sure we learn a lot of things about and now it's valuable for people is that eventually we got to that state where every team is now using the incident database and thinking that it provides them value. The one thing that usually was a good incentive for teams was that they would find in this process the escalations that sometimes they were missing in the team. So, you might have a level 1, a level 2, maybe you have like a senior manager at the end of the rotation, but then sometimes, things will go even further, like then the scope of your team, or like you need to get some more decision makers with you on the call. And without the formal process, sometimes people had a hard time doing that. And so having like the safety of this environment through the process and implementing that usually was a good selling point for all those teams, and we got to that eventually.
Good, thanks. So the next question is from Jack Oakley. The question is, did you consider a system like ServiceNow instead of creating an incident database? We
did look at some tools. We had some tools. Also, it was not ServiceNow, but some other tools that we're using for ticketing and things like this. I'm not saying we couldn't have potentially used that service or another service, but that was started like as a small project in SRE, and so we started having like a bunch of small code bases which would basically implement some parts of our incident process, which was like very, very customized for us. Like Matt mentioned that some like escalation workflows or like some things like that were very specific to Datadog and not really found in other customers. And so that was kind of the development work of the SRE teams and some other infrastructure teams. And so eventually became kind of like its own thing. But maybe I'm not really answering the question. So it could have been, but I guess we chose a different road.
Good. The next question again from Sam Handler. Thanks, Sam, for bringing those in. What data and metadata do you collect about incidents to store in the incident database?
I can take this one. So generally these fall into some broad categories. Like one of those categories is the customer impact. So we collect data about the extent of customer impact, both in reach and also in just like the impact of it, the magnitude of it. So we keep up with the amount of time that customer impact occurred, and as well as which customers experienced it. But then there's also metadata related to root cause analysis and triage and assignment of responsibility for stabilization and remediation. So you'll have tracking of things related to which teams or services are involved, and then things like which data center might have been involved. Just generally things that help you hone down the bug or the gray failure happened in this area of the system. So that's where we should investigate further. And then there's like one other class of things that's kind of related to that post-incident follow-up, which is tasks. And so you might have tasks that are related to the incident as you're actually doing remediation. And you can add those in and check them off as you go. But then there might also be tasks that later need to be converted and converted into like a long-standing ticket in whatever ticketing system you're using. And so we have a task tracking system as well, and that's a form of metadata. So you can see what was done in an incident or what was tried, perhaps, and then ultimately what they decided to say, like, okay, this fixed it for now, and then these are the things we're going to take to fix it again in the future, so that this incident is prevented next time.
And additionally to that, so Matt talked about the metadata and all those things that basically surround the incident. But I think we showed it in the slide earlier. Like what's very, very important, at least in my opinion, is the timeline, or just like any piece of information that people talk about or make an action about, like during the incident. And so that's more like really incident data itself, like what happened during the incident. And there's two reasons for that. So we usually organize it as a timeline, and people can either highlight some things on the communication channel like Slack or the incident application itself, or like just paste in Datadog graph, Datadog, other types of data from Datadog. And really like the two reasons for that is like, one, it is really, really important to get the context, as we were saying earlier. Like if you are catching up on an incident and you just don't know what happened before. And then second, when you run the forensics and when you run the postmortem, believe me, you will be very, very happy to find all this information already put up together in the incident database, because you won't have to go through the audit logs and understand who did what at what moment in the incident, etc. So it really helps streamline that whole process also of follow-up.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. The timeline is really helpful for getting a sense of the narrative of an incident. You can even see messages tracked on the timeline, such as, I'm going to investigate in this area, or I'm going to try this command and see what happens from here, what data I get back. So yeah, having the narrative of the incident, every incident is unique. but you start to see kind of patterns in the narratives.
And maybe one last thing about this is that one of my recommendations when we run the incident training and we are kind of like going through that process is really state on the incident timeline or like the incident channels that, you know, like everything that basically you're working on. And sometimes it might be like a red herring, sometimes it might be like a lead that eventually turns out like it's not actually the problem or like it's not the fix that works. But capturing all those things regardless is really important to then analyze after the fact and also understand what you got wrong during the incident. Going back to that learning experience that you get from analyzing incidents a bit more. So really, like sometimes people will tell us a bit, we're not going to put this in the incident database because it turned out to be wrong or like the metric was not the right metric. But I would really highly recommend actually doing it.
Okay, good. We have a couple of similar questions, one from Cody, one from Daniel. They're both asking whether there are plans to integrate our incident app with other tools outside Slack and the different options that they're asking for. Cody was asking about Microsoft Teams and Daniel about Rocket Chat.
Yeah, I'm glad people are asking about this. Integrations are like a really strong part of Datadog generally. We come with a lot of integrations out of the box, and it makes Datadog very easy to use without too much configuration or having to build your own connection. And so, yeah, definitely integrations with many different, we want to meet customers where they are. So yeah, we're exploring all of these kinds of integrations to provide, plug and play with, that stage of the incident or that function of incident response, whether that's, shared video conferencing or like a shared, chat workspace, things like that.
Great. We have for now one last question. I wonder if you have an offer to customers, something like a system status dashboard where those incidents are also displayed. I don't know if I guess they're talking about a public status page. I'm not sure. Basically a place where you can have all those incidents, but I don't know if they mean public, private. They mean private. Thanks, Marcin.
Yeah, so this is generally what the incident database provides, a shared place where any Datadog engineer and, in the product for any customer, you can go to that database and see, the incidents that you have declared in the past and all of the resolution that took place around them and all of the data tracking, and also, have them be searchable so you can find incidents that are similar to the one that maybe that you're interested in. Yeah, so I think that's essentially what the database itself is, in terms of like tracking the incidents themselves. I hope that answers the question. So you would have, this is your easy declare a new incident off of here, but you also have all of your previous incidents. The ones that are active would show up and be highlighted at the top of this page, and they're searchable, but there's also, every past resolved incident as well, displayed below these in a separate list. And so those are also searchable.
And I think add to that the integrations that Matt was talking about earlier. So if you have like other custom systems or third parties that essentially provide that kind of features, like I think eventually we would be able to integrate with them directly.
Good. So last question again from Marcin. Are those incidents possible to visualize as charts based on tags maybe?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, I think what we're talking about here is maybe a form of reporting or analytics. And this is something that we do internally. It's, we have a form of reporting that we run nightly to do analysis on. But yes, this is something that we're exploring for the product as well. Having Datadog products create analytical data on their own usage is something that we've done in other areas of the product. And so incidents should not be special and we should also do it for incidents.
Okay, another question. I know we are over time, but we want obviously to try to answer. So probably we are going to stay at least 2-3 more minutes. How do you go about declaring an incident to pulling in the people needed to resolve? Do you use a third-party tool like Slack or PagerDuty, or something in-house as well?
I think this is maybe talking about our process.
Yes, I guess they're talking about our internal process.
Yeah, and in our process, again, I think this goes back to incident management or incident response as an iterative process. You need to be able to bring people in, as well as, yielding a public shared workspace where people can join themselves. People will self-select if they see something that that they're particularly interested in. Maybe it's something that's related to their team's responsibilities. And if they see an incident come across a global announcement channel, they'll usually come in and see what's happening. But yeah, in general, we do use third-party tools like PagerDuty. We have on-call rotations for those kinds of tools. But then I think, naturally there's a certain element of, human trust involved as well, where people will back channel some of that as well and say, here's the incident channel for this incident. I thought you might be interested. I know we had talked, about this system before, and so that kind of thing will happen as well. And that's one of the things that we're hoping to bring into the product, so that it doesn't necessarily happen, outside in an untracked way, to have these additional notifications where when you have an incident running and it occurs to you as you're seeing the signals come through the timeline, this person that I know on this other team might be interested in that, to have a tool right there immediately in front of you in the product where you can bring that person in and notify them of the incident, and maybe even include some of that context of why they came to mind.
Okay, good. So I think that was the last questions, and we are already 10 minutes over time. So thanks very much, Matt and Leo, for sharing your experience and your knowledge with us today. I think this has been a great session. Thanks for everyone who attended the session, and thanks for bearing with us with the connectivity issues we had today. Again, we are going to have our next Datadog On session in about a month, so by the end of September. So if you're interested in joining, please go to datadogon.datadoghq.com, where you can not only see what's coming next, but also the recordings of any previous session. Again, thanks very much, and see you next time.